All right. So yeah, again, give Ethan and Cassidy hearty welcome. So you guys will find out this is a rated R classroom pretty quick. So just brace yourselves. We talk about a lot of deep stuff in here, right? So brace yourselves. So again, so we can do a lot of different things this week. We can talk Lovecraft. We can finish talking Sims since we didn't get to last week. Let's start with Sims, I guess, because he's completely different than Lovecraft. much different. But you guys, are you guys prepared to discuss Grayling today? You guys feel good about it? Proceeding with that line of inquiry for a few minutes.
I'm not gonna have a massive amount of input because my brain's so full of Lovecraft stuff right now. Because I dove way into it.
Yeah, yeah, me too. I read Grayling last week, so that's in last week's thoughts, I suppose. But
well, we can go on and move on to the Lovecraft. I'm just behind. Y'all don't have to slow down on my account.
Yeah, we'll start Lovecraft. If we got time at the end, we'll get back to Sims. Okay. So Howard Phillips Lovecraft is our writer for today. Howard Phillips Lovecraft. And he was writing in the 1920s, or the 19 teens, 1920s, 1930s. And this was the time period that he was writing his work. Lovecraft, the guy was brilliant. I mean, he studied a lot of like old ancient, like he was an avid reader, right? He wished that he lived in the 1700s. Like he ate up like all of this different type of work, that all these early novels and stuff that were written in the 1700s. So he based his writing style off of these old books in the 1700s. So even for his time in the 1920s, 1930s, he writes in a very purposefully archaic way, using a lot of like archaic words and whatnot that are, frankly, even for the time, weren't fashionable. So almost 100 years later, right? We're 90 some years since Lovecraft was writing, right? Even 100 years later, right? It feels even more antiquated in a way. But he's a challenge to read in that regard. Probably our most challenging writer in class. But this guy's. Or go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know if it's going to do us any good or not, but I had looked up some things that were going on in 1923 when the Rats in the Wall was written. Prohibition had just started. Radio started being mass produced, so everybody was getting more media content. It felt like the world was closer to home. The economy was up 42%. So American cars, and it says first American airship makes flight. And then the insulin for diabetes was introduced.
There's lots of stuff going on, right? We were fresh off the First World War, and all the tragedies from that, right? The world had never seen destruction on the level that we had gotten in the First World War. I mean, just to give you guys an idea, there was one battle in the First World War that had so many casualties. It was more casualties than in the entire Civil War in America. More people died in one battle in World War I than in the entire Civil War in America. It's pretty crazy to think about. Devastation on an awful scale. Of course, if you want to dive into the nitty gritty of that, the reasons were they had a lot of advanced defensive weaponry. So this was the age of the machine gun. But as far as offensive weaponry, they were still using old Civil War era rifles and stuff. So it was a constant stalemate in World War One. And that's why there was so many deaths and casualties. By the time we got to World War II, there was a lot more offensive weaponry like tanks and better aircraft and all that type of stuff, which caused even more devastation, right? But yeah, the world had never seen such crazy devastation. We've talked about Sigmund Freud in here before, but he was also living and writing in his time. He actually even came up with his idea at this time of the death drive. He argued that all humans inherently wish for their own death in a way. It's kind of like the Poe idea we talked about with the Imp of the Perverse, like how you imagine like jumping off a cliff or something, right? That's Freud took that idea too and ran with it, partly because he saw so much death and destruction during World War One. But the devastation was so bad, like even over in Europe, polygamy became a thing because there was so many women, but not enough men, right? So polygamy actually became an acceptable mores for a while over in Europe because there were so few men after the First World War was over. I had to bring that, since Jacob brought up history, I had to bring that up because that's definitely something that influences Lovecraft here in some way. The biggest thing to say about Lovecraft, though, is, so I'll introduce his ideas, but another historical current here. Lovecraft was what we would call today, what's a polite word to use here? Xenophobic, right? Lovecraft was very xenophobic. And his xenophobia was so extreme, this helped shape a lot of his fiction. And if you read Call of Cthulhu today, right, it's hard not to see that. He lived up in Massachusetts area, right? He lived up there. That's where most of his stories are set. Rural Massachusetts, though, right? Not really in Boston or any of those areas. Like a lot of his stories are set in the rural part. For instance, Rats on the Walls takes place in England, which is an interesting setting too. But he very much distrusted Black people, right? He very much distrusted immigrants who were immigrating over to America, right? Lovecraft was a white supremacist, right, for his time, right? He thought that other races were inferior to whites. We will break some of that down here, even in Rats on the Walls. I noticed a lot of stuff in Rats, besides the cat's name, right? The cat's name probably raised some of you guys raise an eyebrow, right? But there's even other stuff in here that's very racist, right? But notice that I'm still teaching him in this class, right? Just because his imagination was so vivid that, well, he's worth reading. We have to break down his politics a little bit. Well, part of understanding his art is understanding his politics. Right? It might not be acceptable by today's standards, but his politics did shape his art, as we will break down a little bit. But it's comic. It's comic. He's comically racist in pretty much every one of his stories. Like
I was going to say the same thing. It's like, it's almost the point of, like, wasn't laughing because the cat's name was funny by no means, but it's like that. It's such a high level of ignorance. You're like, I can't believe that something like this went. I mean, obviously we don't notice back in those times, but now you read it and it's so beyond the realm of stupid
Right.
that you just kind of laugh at it. And then you also appreciate the other aspects of the story where he's a genius writer, but then you got to separate the, kind of like we did with the discussion post with Sims, you got to separate and in his stories, it's a little bit tough to do that.
Yeah, when that word is being slung out at you so much, right? It's hard to avoid it.
Yeah, because you forget to put your mindset in the time that was written to our time, and you sit there and like, I can't believe he's using that so much, and then you remember, oh wait, this was written back then. He kind of used it as a catcher, is the way I took it.
I read somewhere, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I read somewhere, I can't remember the source, but they said that the KKK actually asked him to stop, because he was telling people privately apparently that he was affiliated, and I'd read somewhere that one of their spokespersons had said, "Hey, stop telling people that you're affiliated with us," because on one hand he kind of seemed crazy at the time because he was writing about all this cosmic horror, and everybody, because he didn't get really popular until after he died, right?
Right.
So in the time, people were probably like, this dude's a little bit nuts. And then he's sitting there, a lot of the KKK members, they kind of hid their vicious racism. They were still openly fine with segregation. They were okay with the norm, but they weren't hateful about it to where if somebody in public eye that had a different opinion, caught it, they were like, okay, that guy's a jerk, if they didn't believe the same way. And apparently I read that they asked him to stop saying that he was so affiliated with them because he was making them look bad.
I haven't ever heard that before. That's pretty crazy.
I'll have to try to dig it up and post the link in the discussion board there, but I came across it. It was one of those things. It may not have been true because I was searching stuff about him, and then I came across like the small little preview of the article that Google gives you before you read it. So, I mean, it wasn't Reddit or Quora or anything like that. It was an actual site, but I have to find it. It's pretty neat.
Right. You guys have probably never read anything like this before, right? That's got such blatantly obvious racism in it that it's like part of that's because like that kind of stuff gets filtered out over time, right? The only reason why Lovecraft still read is because he's so influential. If he wasn't so influential, we wouldn't even be talking about him because he would have been cut a long time ago. Yeah, I mean, that's something we'll have to unpack today, especially in Call of Cthulhu, right? We get the cat's name and rats on the walls. And in Call of Cthulhu, right, we have a voodoo cult down in Louisiana, right? Who worships Cthulhu, right? So we'll have lots of stuff to unpack with that today. So yeah, even today, as far as like an English classroom goes, this is really the only type of class that Lovecraft is read in as far as English classes go, like a Gothic themed class, right? If you were taking American literature after the war, for instance, you probably wouldn't read him in there because he's not included in the books. Probably should be, but he's not. So extending beyond all that, this guy's, if anyone has influenced modern horror, this guy's done it, right? Poe is very influential on his own terms, but this guy changed horror forever when he wrote these stories. His central idea behind all of the stories is the fear of the unknown, right? That we all have as people. Right? It's a bit of a different thesis than something like Poe, right? his idea was what's scary is what we can't know, what we can't wrap our minds around. The very first few words in the Call of Cthulhu, he says, the most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity. It was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each stream staying in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little. Someday the piecing together of this disassociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of their frightful position therein that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. All right, so that first paragraph of the story kind of sums up his idea, right? What's scary is the unknown. And Lovecraft invents, we have what's called the Cthulhu mythos that he invented. So he invented this whole fictional mythology about these different beings that exist that are outside our ability to comprehend them. Right? They're in another plane of existence, right? That's beyond our ability, our mind to conceive of. They're gods in a way, right? That's what his character. That's what these characters are. They're gods, and he calls them like the great old ones, right? The great old ones is what he calls them. So Cthulhu's one of them. It's these beings that go beyond their comprehension. The attempt to even try to comprehend it, like if you would see one of these things, it would pretty much explode your brain, right? It would make your brain, it would make you go mad just to even see it, because your brain wouldn't even be able to comprehend what you're seeing. It would just make your brain go, right? That's the basic idea here of Lovecraft. All of his stories, a lot of these stories that you might read, Call of Cthulhu is one. But if a character encounters one of these beings, usually the character goes crazy at the end, right? Maybe there's a slow process of going crazy, but always it involves the process of going mad as the story goes on, because the character further it goes down the rabbit hole, the crazier stuff gets. So, but that idea of, it's called cosmic horror that goes beyond our ability to even comprehend it. Like this idea has influenced almost everything that we have today. Like, any of you guys in here watch Stranger Things on Netflix? Right. Well, notice how that Stranger Things is a very Lovecraftian show, right? Because there's these things that go beyond our ability to comprehend that are happening there in that little town on that show, right? There's even a Cthulhu like tentacle thing, right? In the show.
There's an episode on Supernatural, if you guys watch that, about Cthulhu.
There's an episode on South Park about Cthulhu too.
Have you watched the Nicolas Cage Color Out of Space?
Yep.
I thought the movie was incredible. I had no clue that it had a correlation to H.P. Lovecraft until I spoke to my brother-in-law about it. He's like, "You remember that movie we watched?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, that was. And then as soon as he told me that was Lovecraft influence, I was like, "Makes a lot of sense." After reading Cthulhu, and then watching that movie, I'm like, okay, I can definitely see where he would have a book that's identical to the movie.
Hey, Professor, do you teach an English 3 class?
Do I teach English what?
Do you teach an English 3 class?
Did you say 3 class?
Is there an English 3?
Yeah, so after 102, there's a 200 level class that you can take as part of
What's the theme in that?
usually for those, it's you take British Lit or American Lit or something like
Okay.
that, or
I
ancient.
was just
Go ahead.
I was just thinking of if there was any classes that maybe did like more of a sci-fi theme, like uh, who's a famous sci-fi, like H.G. Wells or something.
Robert Heinlein.
I'm completely off subject. I was just wondering.
Yeah, that kind of thing shows up in some other classes. There's 102 here at Southern's a class where each professor does their own thing usually. All right, so my thing is this stuff, I suppose. All right, the other classes are a little bit more standardized. But yeah, getting back to Lovecraft here. Like I said, you could think of a ton of stuff that he's influenced. Almost everything he's got his fingers around in some respect. There's not a lot of really good adaptations of straight up adaptations of Lovecraft. Like I said, his fingers are all over everything. As far as like really good straight up adaptations, A Caller Out of Space that Colton mentioned is a pretty good one. There's not a whole lot of them. Halloween 3 is a very good Lovecraftian film. The only one that doesn't have Michael Myers in it, right? That's a very Lovecraftian film. But Lovecraft's also influenced music. Something else to mention. He's very much influenced music. Heavy metal loves Lovecraft. Heavy metal loves Lovecraft. He's very heavy. His ideas are, I can't tell you how many heavy metal songs there are that are about Lovecraft's work. Metallica has written songs about Cthulhu, right? Dream No More, right? That's a pretty recent Metallica song that they wrote about. It's about Cthulhu waking up and like destroying all of humanity and all this stuff, right? So yeah, his ideas are very heavy metal, right? We might break down why that is, but if you're a metalhead, which I tend to be, that tends to be kind of the music I gravitate to. Right? He's very much influenced that. So if you've ever listened to Metallica, you have for sure probably heard a song about Cthulhu or something at some point. But even video games. Any of you guys video gamers in here? There's the very good video game that came out a couple of years ago called Bloodborne. You guys played Bloodborne on PlayStation? That's very much a Lovecraftian game. It's it. That game's even like designs itself around like this idea of madness. Like the further you go mad in the game, the more stuff you start to see that other people don't see and stuff like that. So
I'd say Silent Hill's probably a good example of something that he may have influenced.
yeah, Silent Hill for sure. Very intense, like psychological horror stuff, right? The Dark Souls, right? That's another very Lovecraftian type of game.
There is a video game called the Call of Cthulhu.
Mm-hmm.
When I searched up on YouTube, I like to watch the different animations, and a lot of that popped up. I got confused at first because I was like, is this the story? But it was like just the video game.
Yeah, there was a Call of Cthulhu video game that came out a couple of years ago on PlayStation and Xbox, PC, and all that. It was pretty good. It was pretty good. It was a good roller coaster ride. I enjoyed it. And also stuff like board games, right? There's like if you're in like really nerdy like board games, like there's tons of like Lovecraft inspired board games and whatnot too. I would play them, but I don't know many people who would play them with me, right? So here I am, right? All sad. Can't play Lovecraft games, tabletop games. So that's my introduction to Lovecraft. I'll turn the floor over to you guys now. What was your experiences like with Lovecraft? We'll get the general impressions, and then we'll dive into specifics. But, I'm especially interested to hear from our newcomers here, right? Talk about a crazy writer to get your very first class here in English 102, right? Lovecraft, right? Welcome to college, right? But,
I enjoyed the Rats in the Wall when I did the Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah,
The
I agree
Cthulhu
with that.
kind of. Go ahead, guys.
I was just agreeing. I like the Rats in the Walls better than I did the Call of Cthulhu.
why so?
The Rats in the Wall one it felt like an actual story. The Call of Cthulhu just felt like, I don't know, it just felt like it was running through a page of notes where he was reading, where he was following his uncle's notes. It kind of just felt a little bit boring.
Yeah, very fragmented, right? You're kind of piecing together the story with the guy who's telling it, right?
Yeah.
I think I like the Rats in the Walls better because of the narration. Like, I didn't suspect anything was wrong with the narrator until the main end of the story. And then when you go back and read it, it's like it's kind of foreshadowed with his ancestor, but I just like the suspense because it carried me all the way up through the end of the story.
Those are my exact thoughts on that too. Like she said it word for word, but I thought I read the story and then I was thinking the whole time, well, I wasn't even thinking because it was subconscious that I could trust the narrator. I didn't even feel like I was reading a first person narration. It felt like I was reading factual information because, he's talking about everything he's doing, just laying it out for us. And saying exactly how he's remodeling the house, where his bedroom's at, talking about what his cat's doing. And, I'm thinking this is just a horror story. It's just like any supernatural horror story. And at the end, I'm like, oh my God, this guy's batshit crazy. And then you go back and you're like, okay, yeah, he probably was. Like you read all the stuff. At the end, if you come to the conclusion that he did eat Captain Norris, then you're like, okay, all this stuff makes a ton of sense now, because in my discussion post, I noted that there wasn't a ton of evidence that everyone else was seeing the exact same thing that he was. They may have been seeing the cats act strange or hearing things, but he was the only one that really mentioned hearing the scurrying of the rats constantly. And then, they go down there and they see I took it as like a depiction of an underworld kind of, basically a different civilization going on. Even though that could be real, it could have happened and everybody else saw everything that was going on. The fact that he pretty much blacked out for 3 hours and was, going through all that weird, I don't know, what would you say that is, chanting? He was basically calling out worship chants to think who was the god that he was chanting to.
I think
Was there a specific one?
I think it was the Roman god of something.
Was it Attis? Was that one of them?
I think so.
And then I know he says, but what did he say? Magna Mater, and I think that translates to something mother, right? So, once you go back and you look at all that stuff after that specific behavior, then you're like, okay, yeah, this guy's nuts. and it did throw me for a loop a lot. I was really, really surprised. Like Cassidy said, there was a ton of suspense building up to it. And then it kind of blasts you in the face with, oh man, he just probably ate this dude, or something really, really crazy ate the guy. So that was really cool.
Yeah, the great Magna Mater, that means great mother, right? Great mother. But some of that is Latin and some of it's gibberish that he's throwing out there. Because some of it's Latin, some of it's gibberish. The more Lovecraft you read, you find out like the old civilization and stuff that existed before ours, right? They had their own language, right? We get that when Call of Cthulhu, right? We get the language about Cthulhu, like in the great city, the dead Cthulhu lays waiting, right? But we get that in the original language in Call of Cthulhu. So for some reason or other, this memory of this old language comes back up to their narrator and writes on the walls. He starts speaking that language then when he goes down into that tunnel. Yeah, you guys are exactly right to point out, right? That's part. I enjoyed both your posts, both Colton and Cassidy on that, because you guys were right to point out he seems stable, unlike Poe, where the narrator's unstable from the beginning. He fools you, right? You think that he's stable, but he's really not. So, when in the story did he go nuts?
I think a good way to compare it's like Poe is like you're kind of watching a snuff film, and Lovecraft's like a classic supernatural horror movie. And then I compared it to The Devil Made Me Do It. I don't know how many of you guys have watched that movie, but I think it's kind of a similar instance. That nobody else really notices anything wild or out of the norm. And then that kid in that movie, he gets possessed by the demon that was in his girlfriend's little brother, and then ends up just murdering his landlord. And in his sight of everything that's going on in the moment, it's like way different than everyone else's account. And then Ed and Lorraine Warren have to prove that he was indeed possessed by something supernatural, because that was the case. It was flat out. He wasn't like one of Poe's characters where he was just unstable or an alcoholic or addicted to drugs and just flat out killed somebody because of some kind of obsession. It was just that there was something deeper going on, and nobody really noticed it until the time came to notice. And that's when in the movie the guy killed his landlord, and then in the story he ate Captain Norris.
Right. Yeah, the correlations there were pretty interesting. I've seen Conjuring 3. I saw it over the summer. Just as a side note, by the way, guys, that new movie that just came out, Malignant, I hated it. Have you seen it, Colton? Not yet.
No. I'm trying to look at I haven't even watched the trailer for that movie.
The same guy who does the Conjuring movies made that one.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
That's surprising that it wasn't good, because normally when you get a director in a horror movie, they tend to kind of stay on track with making decent movies. But
it seems to be one of these movies that people either love or hate. I fell in the hate category with it.
yeah,
I seen the trailer and I was like, no, I'm good. It looked too hyped up. Usually when they're really hyped up, when you see different trailers of the same movie, I'm like, no, I'm not gonna watch that.
well, it's kind of one of those things. I hate trailers that hype up their movie so hard that there's not really a whole lot left to see in the movie. They give away all the jump scare scenes. They give away all the gory, nasty stuff. When you said that it was kind of one of those movies that you either love or hate, that took me back to movie I watched on Netflix. I can't remember the name of it for the life of me, but it was about somebody that some people took away as the guy was going into a state of like a hardcore state of dementia. I can't remember what the movie's called. I'll figure it out, but you guys have to watch it because I mean you'll either waste 2 hours of your life, or it'll be the best 2 hours of your life. It's that kind of movie.
It's, if you got HBO Max, like you're not going to lose anything if you watch it except your time, right? So give it a go and come back next week and tell me I'm wrong. And you can tell me I'm wrong. I'm wrong about most things in life, by the way. So, but anyway, getting back to the point at hand, right? We were talking about the narrator, right? How the narrators seems to have a grip, but doesn't really. The story's a masterclass. Rats in the Walls, I think, is a masterclass of setting. Right? He does a great job. Like it reminds me of the Fall of the House of Usher. Right? It's a very similar type of vibe here. Right? We're in England. It's this old hereditary castle that this guy's pretty much at. Right? We learn that it goes back. This place goes back many, many, many centuries. Right? It's this old castle. This goes back to before the Norman conquest. It just goes back to the ancient Romans. Right? Maybe even before them, like to the Druids. Right? So yeah, this is an ancient place. Right? So I mean, we don't really get that sense in America as living in America. Right? Our history is so unknown as far as like with Native Americans and stuff when we're talking about thousands of years ago. And we don't really get that same eerie vibe that they get over there, right? For the long, there's a lot of history here that's not recorded. I guess that's what I'm going for. So you get these old manors and stuff that go back to even before prehistory almost, right? That's a little creepy in a way. So yeah, that's part of the interesting part of the story too, is that manor, that abbey that he's at. Goes back before the Romans even, which is a pretty crazy thought. I don't know, what do you guys think of the setting of this? He keeps digging deeper down until he gets to something that blows his mind entirely, right?
I just took a hard look at your background there today. There's a lot going on in that picture.
Yeah, the background is the city of Rolia in Call of Cthulhu, right? It's the city that they find Cthulhu in. So notice that the architecture is not human, right? It's not a human architecture. It's like even this idea of cosmic horror, even is how this city is built. Like the geometry in the city, it's beyond our geometry, right? That this isn't human geometry. It's showing up with these like constructions and stuff. So
I thought
that's what my background is. You know.
I thought the the descent down into the, like you said, the thing that blew his mind was pretty neat, because there are probably places like that. And there are probably places today that are still like that. Like if you're a conspiracy theorist, and I'm a conspiracy theorist on some things, other things I just think it's really, really interesting to read about the conspiracy theory. And if anybody knows anything about Alex Jones, you've heard of him sneaking into what's called Bohemian Grove. And it's apparently this, big temple where the elitists and the rich go to, sacrifice and have their sex cult activity. And you're looking at kind of the same theme there with this basically underground civilization. I mean, didn't he mention that there were like, what do you call them? Quadrupeds?
Mm-hmm.
quadruped bones, like animals with 4 feet down there, like, and then on top of that, somewhere in between. Did he say something about somewhere in between, like a gorilla and a human? So you're possibly talking about an intermingled civilization that was down there for years and years and years. And I mean, we don't know what's out there. I think that's something that's really cool about the story, is that you can't say it's impossible.
I'm sitting here listening to you, and like I said, I haven't read the book or at all, or the story at all. But I'm a real big science guy. And I like to think about quarks and the fourth dimension and time as a dimension, and what to us would be an up and down vertical staircase. They could, time could be a highway to them, and that's what I was talking background there, and like Professor was explaining, is everything's different for them. They're not even viewing you as a snack.
Right.
But the ominous part of climbing down into those depths is you're just reduced to nothing, and you realize that your whole life it's close to meaningless, because there's not only is there billions of people on your planet, but now you're in this entire new reality.
Yeah.
You're not even on another planet. You're in an entire different reality that's populated, and
right.
that's a big thought in itself.
Right, and then that's we're kind of bouncing back and forth between Cthulhu and Rats in the Wall. But that's what I had wrote down in my notes here, that humans really yearn to understand things that they shouldn't. And I think as we do that, we create we're kind of walking into a sword, because you can already look at a human life and say that we're merely more than an ant. So when you dig into things like in Cthulhu, when you get into that, where the geometry of the architecture is not even relevant to our eyes, we can't even tell what's going on. Then,
well, here's the thought for you. How what's the word? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time spitting out my thoughts tonight. But what do you know about quantum computers?
The quantum theory.
With a regular computer, it's pretty quantum theory, quantum computers. It all kind of flows into one thing after you get to it. With a regular computer, it's basically designed to decode 1 to 0. But we go from that binary system where it's just off on, to whenever you switch to a quantum computer, it's actually a 4-digit code. It's 0101, and it's grouped like that. And it's not a different what's this? It's not more hardware. It's not additional hardware. It's the thought that either it is or it is not. It's the what if of the computer.
It's just like an Interstellar. I mean, he goes into that space in Interstellar where he's between all time and space, and that drives you back into string theory. And then, but with the Call of Cthulhu, you have these voodoo cults, and was there another group of cults, Dr. Yeager, that were worshiping? And
yeah, that was the group who killed the professor.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So you have these groups that are, I'm trying to remember the story in my head, that are they're doing all these things. They have these idols, or worshiping them, and then the group of sailors are the ones that awaken him. So it's like, it gives you that thought of, we're doing this stuff for this being, and he probably don't give a damn. Like, he's sleeping, we're trying to wake him up, and like, how significant does that make your cult? And then I think that says a lot about Lovecraft's ideology. And he didn't really like the whole basis of human civilization. and I'm pretty sure he was an atheist, a professed atheist. So he was one of those guys that was just like, why are you doing what you're doing? And I could argue the difference in, what I would disagree with him with there. I mean, it's the teachings is where I would disagree with him, because, the teaching of a cult versus the teaching of a religion founded on love is a lot different. But I do understand what he's saying in a sense that why are we doing this? If these sailors can stumble upon this place and awaken him and see all these things that we wanted to see, and they're out there in the swamps and out there killing people over it, they don't have a clue if he's really real or not, other than vision, other than these dreams are happening. And ignorance is kind of bliss, just like with Wilcox in the story. Nothing bad really happened to him. I mean, he got sick, he had the fever and stuff, but he kind of just shed it off because he didn't give in to that call. So I think that's a good theme there, a good message, that being ignorant and not going out of your way to search for things that you can't understand is important.
Yeah, to build on what you said, Colton, Lovecraft interrogates this old idea that we have called humanism, right? Humanism. And that's the idea that humanity is the most important part of the universe. Right? Everything centers on us. Even if you go back to like Christianity, right? In the Catholic Church in the 1500s, were very hostile towards Copernicus, right? Because Copernicus came up with the idea that the earth revolves around the sun, and that the sun doesn't revolve around the earth, right? Copernicus had to wait to publish his book until after he was dead, because he knew that the church would go after him for that. The church had a lot of political power at that time. Well, why was the church mad about that idea? Right, because it suggested that mankind and the earth is not the center of the universe, right? Which in Christianity, everything is centered. God creates the universe around people, right? So, that's humanism, right? The idea that we're the most important things in the universe. Right? When Lovecraft makes us look like ants, right? That's a scary thought for us, right? We think that we're the superior beings on this planet, or even we might be the only intelligent beings in their whole universe. Right? Well,
What do you guys know of Hermetic mythology?
go ahead. Not much, Jacob. So elaborate for us.
Okay, Hermetic mythology, based around this great 1400s. It was supposed to be his third reincarnation. He was also known as the thrice great Hermes, which also, came from, a Greek background and all of that. But beyond that, it traces back to Egypt. And Egypt, it has to do a lot with the underworld and playing deep in the earth. And it seems to me that this is following right around Hermetic mythology.
Right. So that might be influencing Lovecraft here. Right. He might have because he's a very avid reader, as I said. He read a lot of mythologies and religion from all parts of the world. So that might be a paper idea, right? How much does Lovecraft influence? How much was he influenced by that? That would be a really cool paper idea, actually, for your final paper.
Did
I don't know how does this idea sit well with some of you guys that we're not that important, that we are like ants in the universe. How does that idea sit with you all?
I've always thought that we were just the lowest on the totem pole in the universe, even though you hear these counts of we're the highest. But there's also beings and things that are bigger than us that we don't understand, and they just chop it up to be science. But science is not always correct. There's always going to be something bigger than science that we're never going to understand. But then I get called crazy and a conspiracy theorist. So, but it's just, if you look at everything as a whole, and then we're just dots to everything else.
I think that ideology, if you look at it on a grand scale, is really dangerous, because if you look at things from the aspect of that we're just ants, or that we're just dots, or that we're just matter or stardust bumping into stardust, then you kind of go into the direction of that there's no consequence to action, or there's no greater good, or there's no worse evil. And then you're kind of looking at it from like a Marxist angle of like, you're not saying that an individual controls society, you're saying society controls an individual, just like how ants fall into line. And I think it's important that we hold on to individual autonomy and realize that we are a self, and no matter what, nobody can take that from us, because if you don't have that idea of self and that idea of individual importance in the world, then everybody will fall into line, like we are ants. And that's how somebody really, really smart at the top is going to understand that, if we, and I think that's what Karl Marx was trying to do. He was trying to be the smart one, but told everybody to get into line. But that's not who we are. We all know that we form our own ideas, and we draw our own conclusions. And that's what's great about the free world. But I think if you, on a large scale, if everybody had that same idea, we would all collapse from under ourselves. It would definitely lead to world destruction. Either world destruction, or we would all become robotic, basically, in a sense. Society would control every single move that we make.
Yeah, that's the idea that we call nihilism, right? The reject, if we are like ants, if life is completely meaningless, right, then what, should we even follow ethics, right? Should we follow laws, right? That's what the idea of nihilism is all about. Nihilism is such a cynical philosophy that it's hard to get behind, right? It's the ultimate cynicism. Nothing matters, right? Your life don't matter, right?
That's why I think that mythos in general is very, very important, regardless of whether or not you're a Christian or a Catholic, or if there needs to be a hero story to where there's an importance, and we're not just, take Star Wars, for example. If we were all stormtroopers, then the world would be what the Empire wanted to be. And if you don't have a Luke Skywalker out there, if you don't have a hero, if you don't have a Jesus Christ, if you don't have a Simba in The Lion King, then we are those ants. We're the ones being ruled. That's it. That's the way it would go. We would fall into line like ants. So you have to have that myth of triumphance, that we are there is a possibility to be a greater individual. We should seek that out and try to be better, and not fall into the mindset of, I agree that we shouldn't seek out things that we don't need to. There's certain things that we shouldn't touch, and certain things that we shouldn't go after for our own good. But individually, as a person, you should always want to better yourself. And I think that keeps us from that nihilistic view. So
And if you guys want an amusing Twitter page to follow Nihilist Arby's. That's something I would recommend. They post stuff all the time like life is meaningless, so you might as well go eat as much Arby's as you want. They post stuff like that all the time. So while we're on this subject, if you want something to laugh at, all right, follow Nihilist Arby's on Twitter. Good times. So yeah, I mean, if Colton's right, like if you do believe in religion, right, if you're a Christian or whatever else, right, you believe there is some other purpose, right? We're not just specks of dust. So Lovecraft's like Colton said earlier, Lovecraft's ideas are very atheist, right? They're not they're very cynical in that way. But in a way, is he wrong, right? When you think about how vast the universe is, right? Our understanding of it grows every day. Like Jacob was mentioning earlier, like quantum physics, stuff like quantum physics. Like you learn in like chemistry class about protons, electrons, and neutrons, right? Quantum physics came out with the idea that there's something even smaller than that. Right,
gluons and quarks.
Yeah, quarks, right? And quantum physics even suggests that everything that came about in the universe came about out of chance, right? All these like quantum particles bouncing off of each other, right? What we have is the result of pure chance. Well, that's
why I was trying to throw in the bit about the computer there. Was because in the programming of the computer, that second set of dots and that byte doesn't exist. It's just the computer saying, is this here, is it not? And they treat that as an additional 1 or 0. And it gives the computer a lot faster processing.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, right? You know, that could maybe lead to nihilism, right? You know, quantum physics suggests that God did not create the world, right? That the world came about out of chance, right? So that's here's another conflict between modern science and religion, right? Because maybe the Earth did come about out of pure 1 in a trillion chance, you know.
That's something that my favorite clinical psychologist speaks on a lot. Is he talks about how, you know, you got that word in there, like even if that is what happened, it still doesn't diminish the importance behind a heroic story, you know, of having that chain of events set into place to tell you how you should act, what you should do, where you should go. And that's a huge question, is like, which one's right? And I think we've kind of come to a general consensus of which ones are the most accurate on how we should live our lives. And still yet, day by day, we're pulling apart pieces of each one, you know. I mean, it was just during the Obama administration that gay marriage was becoming normalized. And, you know, that's something that 70 or 80 years ago, we never would have thought to see happen. And it's not like we're throwing Christianity in the gutter.
Here's an old.
We're picking pieces out of it and saying, okay, this is the story, and these parts are still right 100%. You know, that's what we're doing as a society. As an individual, I know my thoughts and my beliefs, but as a society, we definitely 100% need a story. You know, I think it's important that we have a guideline to follow, regardless of what you believe or who you believe in. But a good guideline needs to be set into place, or we'll end up saying, this is all about chance. I'm here by chance. I'm just going to go rob a bank. Well, now there's consequences to that now because of the story. You know, if you rob a bank, it's a bad thing. We know that. I guess it gives you the argument of, are you born with that or do you learn it?
Well, it's like the concept of language. What really is language? Is it this great mystical thing, or is it something that was developed by man and its thought? You know, we're no longer grunting at each other. It's because somebody took out the time to really look into it. Not only did they look into it, but they put it down for other men to grow and understand their thoughts long after they're gone. And I think that's really what H.P. Lovecraft is getting at. And then, like I said, I didn't read this. This is just going off of what I'm listening to you guys. You know, to me, gather knowledge, distribute knowledge, continuous. And, you know, I may be biased. You know, I'm real into the science and the mythology. You know, I'm not thinking of it as a Christian viewpoint. I'm not thinking of it from a bystander. I'm just going off my opinions and what I've heard to this point in my life about this particular story. And it's just he's he's wanting knowledge to expand. The whole point of going down, whether he understood it or not, was because of curiosity. You know, you don't just climb down into a deep dark hole. What kind of lunatic does that?
It's the same thing in the Call of Cthulhu. I mean, the guy could have closed up his uncle's box and went on with his life.
Can't help it though, right? You gotta go down that rabbit hole. You gotta know. All right.
Gotta know. Yeah. And I mean, it speaks to maybe Lovecraft wanted to give the impression that, you know, we should do that. And also at the same time, there's dangers behind doing it, you know, like maybe he's speaking towards the human nature of curiosity. You know, you just got to, like, it's is it Schrodinger's cat? The theory that's like, you know, the cat's either dead or alive, but you always got to look. You know what I mean? You can't leave the box closed. Like, it's got to be open. It's human nature to want to follow that path, and sometimes it can be dangerous.
Right. Can you think of a more scary fall, right? The fact that some things you can't know, right? Some things will go beyond their imagination. We're arrogant creatures, right? You know, when something goes beyond their imagination, right? That's a scary thought, right? That's hard to. We're prideful creatures. Like dogs don't think of this type of stuff, right? It's only people that think of this stuff.
And dogs are a lot happier than us too.
Right. Right. Lovecraft did have a great mention in Rats on the Walls about what's the cat's hidden knowledge under those yellow eyes, right? What kinds of thousands of years of secrets does the cat have that we don't know, right? And that was a cool description in Rats on the Walls of his cat. What does the cat know about what's going on that we don't? If you guys have ever seen the film Alien, right? Alien is also a great Lovecraft movie, right? The xenomorph and Alien, right? There's a really cool cat in that movie too, right? That sees the alien. There's a great shot of the cat's eye at one point. Right? If you guys know the movie Alien in the 70s, right? It started a great franchise. I kind of want to teach that movie again. I need to get with it.
You could even go simpler than the great unknown that he's speaking of, and like in the Call of Cthulhu. I mean, do you guys ever ask yourself the question of, like, I wonder if my dogs can hear what I'm saying? I wonder if they understand exactly what I'm saying. And they're just like we're arrogant and prideful. If they're just I don't know, if they're just negligent and goofy, or if my cat is sitting there staring at me and can literally read my mind, and that's why he walks away from me while I'm getting ready to pet him, is because he's like, I don't want to be touched right now, and then he walks away. I mean, that's a great unknown in itself, and it's so tiny and so simple, and so it doesn't conflict anything in our lives. It would not make a difference to me whether or not it's true or it's not, but I want to know, and it's scary that we don't know. We probably won't ever know. I mean, it'll be thousands and thousands of years to come before we realize how advanced the brain of a cat is. I mean, you could even say that maybe they have access to those dimensions that we don't. If the fourth dimension is a place that we don't understand, there's creepypastas about cat portals. If you guys like the creepypastas, go read those. That you ever your cat just disappears out of nowhere during the day, and it's like you look all over the house and you can't find them, and then boom, they're sitting on the foot of your bed out of nowhere because they went in a freaking cat portal. They're aliens. We don't know.
They were gods in ancient Egypt, right? They warded off evil spirits. Yeah, who would have thought today would be a philosophy class instead of an English class? Right here we are. Here we are. Some of you guys have been kind of quiet today. We haven't heard much from the Taylors or Haley or Kristen. Any of you guys want to elaborate on any of the stuff we've been talking about? Like, what do we know versus what do other animals know, right? Is this all scary stuff, or are we overthinking it all, right? Any thoughts from any of you guys?
I mean, for me, it's one of those things you think about it so much, you like scare yourself, and then you're like, nope, I'm not going to think about this for a while. And then, like, relating to the cat thing, I'm a crazy cat lady. I have two. So, like, I have one. We call her Biddy because she's mean. And like the evilest stare. I'm sitting here like, she's going to kill me one day. Like, I wonder if like that's what she's thinking about.
Is there anything more penetrating than a cat when a cat glares at you, right? Like a cat knows something, it's judging you, right? Is there something more penetrating than that?
Not to butt in, I know I put in my 2 cents just about everywhere. But one of the things that really pops out in my mind as y'all mentioned cats is like in Alice in Wonderland, Aragon, just some other big stories of the last century with heavy cats. And Alice in Wonderland, the big yellow eyes that are left even after the cat vanishes. That's what stands out in my mind as you guys go over the cat side of it. And I don't have the description. I haven't been through it.
Right.
This is a little random, but did y'all ever see that meme that was like, the dog thinks they feed me, they care for me, they must be gods, and then the cat thinks they feed me, they care for me, I am God.
Yeah.
Like that is so accurate.
But it almost takes you to a sense of like maybe they have that ability and then maybe they have that knowledge that we don't have, because what would we do if we had it? What kind of harm could we cause as humans if we had knowledge of the things that they have? And also, what kind of destructiveness could I mean, think about wolves and dogs, think about what kind of destructiveness a dog could cause with its athleticism and its evolutionary standards. And dogs are wild. They're crazy. But imagine if they had the arrogance and the pride and the technical skills that humans do. Maybe there's a reason and an order to those things.
I mean, I don't know if y'all like talking about like paranormal stuff, like dogs, those just bark at like something that ain't there, like that we can't see. And then you think, is there something there that they see that we can't? Like, I think it was maybe the first Conjuring. I think it was. The dog was barking and the dog ended up getting killed.
The dog knew too much.
You can even extend this analysis to other animals, right? Like think about the crocodile, right? Think about the crocodiles have been here since the dinosaurs, right? So think about like the shared knowledge, even in their genetics, right? That go beyond our imagination, even, right? Like that's an animal that goes back to the freaking dinosaurs, right? They know more about life than we do, right? In many ways.
Here I go again. You started talking about the dinosaurs. Another animal alive today that relates to that would be the gar. The gar is harvested for caviar. And not just any caviar, but the best caviar. A couple conversations ago, I'd mentioned reincarnation and, how that's affected by your knowledge and your karma, whether you're, evil throughout your life or whether you live a good life. How evil would you have to be to come back as an animal whose sole purpose is to be harvested for your millions of babies and to have them eaten by creatures that you can't possibly understand?
So oftentimes while we're on reincarnation, oftentimes like to say that my cat is Sam Walton reincarnated. That's my joke, right? So for all of Sam's past sins in his life, she now has to live with me, right? So I don't know why I came up with that joke. That's a joke that I have about my own cat. So it has to eat the gruel from his own store, right? And the gruel, the cat food gruel, right? So that's my reincarnation joke for you. Yeah, I mean, we've went off topic a lot today, but not really, right? Because this is what Lovecraft's ideas are all about, right? I think all this stuff that we've been highlighting. I don't think we went off topic at all, really, as far as that goes.
No, but I don't feel like we quoted the writing enough.
What is it? Say that again, Jacob.
Like I said, I don't feel like we had the story enough. I don't feel like there's any actual literature going down here. It's just
Philosophy.
just a conversation of our afterthoughts or our forethought. And this is really what I think the class should be about. I don't really have all the time in the world. I'm a busy guy, and I do enjoy reading, but I'm very slow at it. Being able to come here and discuss it before or after, it really helps story completely. But I really think that's where you're starting to get here with the humanities. Never heard it called humanities before. I've always heard it called English. Me growing up, I hated English because English meant nouns and pronouns. And your period goes here, your semicolon goes there. It's not that anymore. The two college classes I've taken here at Southern, it's really helped me understand more about what literature is supposed to mean and less about the structure of the English language.
Right? They call it the humanities, right? And this is we're talking all this subject, English, history, right? Philosophy. Right? This is all the study of being human. right? So you take these kinds of classes because they give you perspectives that science classes don't, right? Makes you think about things like ethics, just like we talked about last week with Hawthorne, right? And all those ethics questions we were asking about Hawthorne last week. You know, that's why you take classes like this. I'm thinking of ending things. I haven't heard of that. I'll have to check that out, Cole.
So do you think that in the rats in the walls, do you think that he actually did it? Or do you think it was rats?
No, I haven't heard of that one myself.
I think it was actually rats.
You think it was actually the rats?
Yeah, that's my opinion. I think it actually was.
I mean, the surrounding evidence would kind of give you that. I mean, where they were at the time of the incident would give you a good idea that it was the rats. I read somebody else's analysis on it, and they used the quote like, often traumatizing situations can blur the memory. So, you know, a situation like that, whether he did it or didn't, it's probably a really good chance that he's got some skewed recollection of the event that took place. So that's why, like we talked about, like Cassidy said, being in class is really hard to be like, man, I trust this guy. But also, like you said, it's a good possibility that it was the rats, especially with the way Lovecraft writes.
Yeah, that's why, that's my reason, right? Knowing Lovecraft, it probably was. Right? So,
and that's how he differs from Poe, I guess, too, in a sense, because you know, like if you go, like I haven't read it yet, but the Color Out of Space movie that they did, you know, it's like present day, all that stuff. There was nothing in that movie that could have made you think, okay, this is in their heads, or you're like, no, this is real. This is going down. This chick just summoned some kind of mythological entity, and it's taking everything over. And no doubt about it. It's like Stranger Things. No doubt about it. All the stuff that's going on in that show is 100% going down. You know, there's no, well, what if? No, it's happening. So that's kind of the way that I get that Lovecraft writes.
I think it was the rats too, but if it wasn't and it was him, I don't think he was crazy until he went down into the hole. And it might have something to do with like the cults and stuff. Like if they did some type of spell, or maybe he like just went crazy, you know, how you do with trauma and stuff. But I think it was the rats too. I don't think it was him.
I think it was generational too. Like you said, like it didn't affect him because he did not live there. You know, it didn't affect his son really because he didn't live there. But when he went there and he went down in there, that generational curse that they had brought on themselves over all the years of evil that they had carried out, it grabbed a hold of him and, you know, made him go nuts, regardless of whatever happened to Norris. It don't really matter at that point when you're talking about why he went nuts. I think it was definitely something to do with his family, his lineage.
That reminds me a lot of that one movie that just came out, the last Conjuring movie. The devil made me do it, because he would argue there. Did the devil make him do it? You know, did what was going on? How would that stand up in court? You know?
Yeah. It's definitely no. They threw him in jail at the end, right? The end of the story. So 1,000% justified. You know, who's gonna believe him?
Right.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a wild story to tell. But Lovecraft wrote it to be wild and very paranormal and otherworldly. That's why there was rats that basically ate an entire civilization that was going on down there worth of people, you know, bones and bones and bones. So I actually was so like struck by the description down in there that I Googled a ton of pictures hoping that somebody would have kind of AI generated something similar based off the description. I really all I could find was kind of like comic, kind of similar to what was in the reading. But I think it'd be neat if somebody made a kind of an animated series on that. I think that would be cool because it described a bunch of different architecture, right? Like all the way from like Roman stuff up to more
Druid.
current. Yeah. So I thought that was neat.
Yeah, the Druids and the Celts, right? They have there's a lot of mythology there too that we haven't unpacked, right? That's a whole interesting can of worms in itself. And that's part of this thing too. They were pre-Roman. But even like notice my background here, the city of Relia, where Cthulhu is found. Right. You know, that's inspired a lot of like crazy art like this, right? As far as imagining what it looked like. But we're bringing Poe up, but Lovecraft loved Poe. Poe was actually one of Lovecraft's favorite writers. So the cult of influence, they call this the cult of influence, right? You know, it's hard not to see Poe in Lovecraft as far as how this narrator is working. But again, my gut feeling, it really was the rats. It really was. Let's dive a few minutes into Call of Cthulhu more closely too. I want to ask you guys this question: how about the boat captain at the end? Right? Is there a more badass guy in all of lit than the boat captain? Right? You have this ancient god who reawakens and comes out. It blows everybody's mind, right? The boat captain's just like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just going to drive my boat into this thing, right? What do I got to lose, right? The boat captain saves all of humanity, right? Because Cthulhu's like, screw this. I'm going back to sleep, right? This is annoying. So, is there a cooler character in all of lit than the boat captain? Man, I don't think so. He faces something that goes so far beyond us, right? And he's just like, you know what, screw it, whatever.
I think the Lovecraft was maybe signifying himself a little bit there.
Probably.
Based off his worldview.
That's what I
Maybe
was
Captain
thinking.
Nemo.
What was you saying, Irene?
That's what I was thinking. I think it was Lovecraft trying to put himself in the story as the boat captain.
Right? If you're faced with something like that, why not? Right? Why would you just cower in fear? Right? Just go out in a blaze of glory. Right? That's kind of what the boat captain does.
I mean, I
Yeah,
get it.
Sorry,
You're
Tyler.
probably gonna die anyway, so
Mhm.
might as well go out like that.
Mhm.
Yeah. You're stuck there in that kind of situation. You might as well just go for it and do whatever pops in your head at first, and just roll with it. I mean, either you're gonna die or you're gonna kill whatever's trying to kill you.
Now imagine being faced with like this Titan figure, right? That's so giant, like it takes up the whole skyline, right? Just ram a little boat into it. Right?
Do you think it would make it easier to be heroic in a situation like that versus I think it would be. I think that it's like you look at it on the like comparing two things, like okay, think about the 9/11 victims, the one that took the plane down in Pennsylvania. Those guys were really, really brave because like they didn't really know what was happening. They didn't know what was going on. They knew the plane was hijacked. They forced their way into the cockpit and took the plane down. But I think it would be much easier to be heroic in a situation like that where you know you're like, shit, may as well.
Yeah.
This dude could smack me with, with the smallest limb that he has, and it would kill me 15 times over. no getting out of that situation. So I think it would be easier to be heroic in a situation like that.
If that happened to me, I would think I was dreaming. And so I would probably do something like that too, thinking I was going to wake up.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think both of you guys are right. I think it would be easier to be heroic in a situation like that. Why did that even bother Cthulhu enough to make him go back to sleep, right? Who knows? we can't wrap our mind around what Cthulhu's thinking. Right? Yeah, the even the way that Cthulhu looks is interesting. That's something I should probably show you guys. Just some Cthulhu art.
Is he inspired by the Kraken? I mean,
Yeah,
that was initially the immediate thought that I got whenever I saw some of the art. It was that he was, supposed to be something like the Kraken.
yeah. This is. Let me pull a good one up for you. Yeah, he's this tentacled octopus looking thing, right? Like the Kraken in Greek myth.
He looks like the. I was gonna say he looks like the guy off of Pirates of the Caribbean, off of what was his name? Davy
Davy
Jones.
Jones. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what he looked like.
Yeah, I can see it 100%.
Yeah, he's got human-like features. I mean, he's got the hands, he's got the eyes, and looks like a skull, but octopus tentacles, right? Yeah, there's lots of entities like this in Lovecraft's mythos, but Cthulhu is something that's influenced pop culture, right? You guys have seen this thing at some point, somewhere, I'm sure, like South Park and stuff, right?
I saw a really viral TikTok about him like 6 months ago and had no clue what it was. And I got really curious today and searched it up to see if anybody had done any
I did
TikToks
too.
from Lovecraft. And I saw it again. I was like, that's that thing. It was like something about being afraid of the ocean. It was like this guy talking to his friend, why are you scared of the ocean? He's like, this is why. There's myths.
Was it like a really scary song too?
You say a really serious song?
No, like a really scary one. Like it was really
Yes.
deep.
Like it was like the picture that it showed was like, I mean, it looked real, honestly. It was computer generated for sure. But it was using this real deep kind of sea shanty song behind it that had a grumble.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
Yeah.
That's crazy that we seen that right before this class. I think I seen it like a month ago.
Yeah, he also one of the gods, and what, of course, you can see again his racism coming up here with this name, right? But one of his gods in his mythos looks like a spaghetti monster, right? Yeah. I think this is one of the more important gods in his mythos. Cthulhu is actually kind of a lesser god in his mythos. This is one of the more powerful ones. You see here how his racism's coming up again, right? I don't have to spell it out. Yeah, I mean, so again, that influence. Let's kind of end class though, talking more about his racist stuff. Right? I think that's something we should kind of wrap our minds around as we conclude. This might be a way to segue Sims back into the conversation too. But you guys be honest here. Tell me what you think. So, should Lovecraft still be read today? Right? you see how he's influenced everything. But like Colton said, his ideas are so backward, right, that they're almost laughable, right, today. How do you make sense of this? Like, should we act like, should we censor it? Right? Should we not read them? Should we read them with a caveat? Right? What's your guys' take on?
I feel like
Even-
censoring it just makes it seem like it didn't happen at all. Like
Right.
I don't feel like you should censor it.
Right. If you don't teach it, right, or talk about them, right, that's whitewashing in a way, right? Making a version of history that's not true.
I feel like we can, as adults, know that he was racist, know that he was a piece of shit, but still know he was like a really good writer and read his writing. And it's not like he's getting anything out of it because he's dead. He's long gone, wherever he went is where he went.
I think you could lead it into current events. I mean, you look at cancel culture, Morgan Wallen did what he did a while back. I'm sure everybody's heard about that. A lot of people didn't because they're also pieces of shit, but most people called him out on it and said, hey man, you got to be better. You got to do better. And a lot of people said, I'm not listening to his music anymore. We're not going to play him on the charts anymore. We're taking him off of our record label. And that's consequences to actions. Like Taylor just mentioned, he's not profiting from being a bigot anymore. There's nobody reading his works and being like, man, I love this dude. I'm going to contribute my money to him. I'm going to go see his shows, all this. And it's kind of that sense of like, we listen to 80s, and I'm sure that we listen to a bunch of 80s and 70s musics that were written by people that hated black people, hated gay people. We still listen to their music. They're probably still, a lot of them probably still alive and getting royalties from the songs. But we have to learn to separate the art from the artist 1,000%, because there's a difference if their art is including hateful speech and, things that could be influential in that line, that would make people act the same way that they act, have the same ideology that they do. But if Morgan Wallen writes a country song about drinking beer, it doesn't immediately turn someone into a racist. Just like if you read a horror story from Lovecraft, we're all adults. We know that just because he used the N-word for the name of his cat doesn't mean we should automatically go around calling every cat we see that name. We're adults. You have to learn to separate the two things.
Well, I get what you're saying, Colton. And what springs to my mind is Fahrenheit 451. It became someone's job to go out and burn literature because it was seen as we were no longer fit for it, or that it caused community problems. Should they destroy it all, or should they just add it to an archive and reinvent literature at this point in our society? I think that's a big question here. Do we really need this anymore? Do we need H.P. Lovecraft, or can we use more modern literature? Can we get this from somewhere else? Or is this something that H.P. Lovecraft invented only he can explain?
J.K. Rowling, I do not like her personally as a person, and she's made many homophobic comments, and I just don't like her as a person. I love Harry Potter, and I always will. It's one of the first book series I ever read. It has a special place in my heart. I just do not like J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, I know she's made a lot of transphobic comments. I know.
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah.
My little brother's screaming. No one's getting murdered. He's playing video games.
Right. Ethan, you want to say something?
It's kind of like the same thing like the NFL. You see people like around here like saying they're not going to watch it anymore, or they're done with it because they're kneeling, or they don't personally believe in it. But just because you disagree with something somebody does doesn't mean you can't enjoy what they're doing or what the entertainment they're giving you.
right? So you're talking about like kneeling for the anthem and football and stuff.
Yeah, just because you don't agree with what they're doing doesn't mean you can't enjoy the product they're making. Same thing that Colton said with the 80s rock bands, 70s rock bands.
And you can even
Yeah,
take it
but
a step.
also you have to. I'm sorry, Colton. And also, you have to think that we all are different. We all have different opinions, different ideas. And we're not going to be the same. We're not going to agree on the same thing. But history also repeats itself. Lovecraft was a great author in his time. And he's going to be a great author because somebody's going to dig up his books, going to read it, and then they're going to amp up like they do everything else in today's society. So it just depends on how you feel about, what their writing is. You don't have to necessarily like them as an author, just what they produce. And that goes along with what Colton said too.
I think you can even take it a step further and say that, we all know that you shouldn't be racist. We all know that you shouldn't be homophobic. We all know you shouldn't hate anyone for their own personal decisions as long as they're not affecting anyone else's life. But there are artists that we listen to today that, that beat women. Like there are plenty of people that listen to Marilyn Manson every single day. And he's constantly being thrown under the bus for being an abuser and like pretty much torturing women. I mean, does he do it? I don't know. It's for the court to decide, whatever. But he's under like serious allegations all the time. And I mean, I still listen to Marilyn Manson. Like I like the songs. I can't help it. That's I don't. But when I listen to the songs, I don't think about beating women. That's the difference. When I read Lovecraft, I don't think about being a racist. If the work is influential and spreads that hate, cancel it. But if the work itself doesn't, read it. Don't celebrate them as a person. Celebrate the work. It's just like if you go into Christianity, talked about common grace last week. You can praise someone for helping somebody out in need and say that it was God working through them, even if they're not a Christian. And just like you can appreciate someone's good art, even if they're a complete piece of shit. And if somebody can draw really good and it's clear as day, the picture's beautiful, you look at it and you say, wow, it's a beautiful painting. And you can appreciate the art. But if the dude that painted it was a Nazi in 1945, then you don't have to be like, yeah, he's a great person too. You don't have to do that. Be like, yeah, this guy painted a beautiful picture, but he's also a dick. I think that's where you gotta be adult about the situation and make a distinction between the two. And the people that are still alive and profiting from these things, they have to be put in line for sure. I don't like cancel culture completely, but whenever it crosses a line like racism or being homophobic or transphobic, I mean, like Taylor said, J.K. Rowling, they busted her for it. Like they straight up told her. She said, I'm not changing my views. Taylor's still reading Harry Potter. I'm still going to read Harry Potter and watch Harry Potter. I still love it, but she messed up. She shouldn't be that way.
Yeah, I know. Or go ahead, Haley.
Last week, who on her discussion post for Sins posted all kinds of great reviews about celebrities or musicians and all the stuff that they've said that people don't necessarily agree with, but yet their songs and stuff still get viewed and popular and people still listen to them this day.
Right.
Yeah, I think I said that about Jay-Z saying he cheated on Beyonce. I said, but I still listen to Holy Grail.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everyone. Like, what you guys are saying, like, obviously, because I'm teaching Lovecraft, right? But there's some English professors who wouldn't go anywhere near him, right? Just because he is so anti-PC by today's standards. And it's not just Lovecraft. Like probably the most controversial book in all of American literature is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Right? The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. It sounds a little crazy to say that, right? It's a crazy controversial book. Great American classic, right? If you think about American lit, you think about Mark Twain and Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, right? But in that book, that the N word is used hundreds of times. But it's used, if you read the book, actually read the darn book, right, you'll see that he uses it a lot to make the racist people look stupid, right? But there's some English teachers that won't go anywhere near it. Or you have certain editions of the book that substitute the N word out and put another word in its place, right? So there's a lot of that kind of thing going on with, but to play devil's advocate, right? Imagine if we were all sitting in a class, we're not on Zoom, right? Imagine if we were all sitting in a classroom together. We're all, pretty much all of us here are white, right? Imagine having that one black student in the class, right? What happens in those cases when we talk about something like this, right? Everybody's eyes go to that person, right? Well, I wonder what they're thinking about, right? I wonder what their thought is, right? So that's a counterpoint for you here, right? About teaching this kind of thing too.
Yeah, because I can't say that's one thing. Now I'm pretty conservative about most things, but I can 100% say that I agree with most of the left whenever they say I've never been oppressed before.
Right.
You know, I don't have any kind of qualities that would make me oppressed as a person. So I don't really know how I'd feel about Lovecraft if I was the one that was being personally attacked in things like Rats in the Wall. You know what I mean? When he names his cat that, I just brushed off my shoulder because I'm not affected. But I think that people of color, their opinions should go into the matter. But at the same time, erasing it from history, like you said, I think that would be more damaging. Because if we erased every racist person from history, there would still be racist people. And we wouldn't be able to look back at people and say, well, they were really dumb then. We wouldn't be able to look back at people in 1995 and say, those people were homophobic back then. They were really, really dumb. There's nothing to learn from.
And Haley, I saw you nodding a second ago. I guess especially about like how our eyes will naturally go to like that person to see their reaction and stuff. You think that's how we are?
Yeah, because like I live in a small town, and there was one class, like I have probably had about 50 people in my class. One girl, she was colored, and like she was always outcasted. But it's just because I come from a small country town.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's right, but that's just how it was.
Yeah, so you guys we're not only talking about the story, right? But you guys are also seeing here the process of creating the discipline of literature, right? Do we let him in? Do we not? That's an interesting question. It all depends on each professor and how far they're willing to go with it. And so,
How many works today will be rolled out 100 years from now?
right?
Based on individual ideas. You just don't know. He probably knew he was doing something stupid back then, but he probably didn't think 100 years from now that we will be having this conversation. He probably was doing it for a laugh or for somebody to say ha ha and break up the tension in the story, but he probably didn't think that we would ever see black and white people going to school together, drinking from the same water fountain, marrying each other regularly. He didn't know about civil rights. And if he were here now, he would absolutely be pummeled. People would be like, you're terrible. But he didn't have a clue and he didn't care. He just wrote about it in the moment. I think
he wrote in these little cheap magazines, right? That's where he published all these stories, these cheap sci-fi like magazines, right? It's called, the one he published the most in was called Weird Fiction. So that was stuff at the time that wasn't even meant to be taken seriously. Right?
I mean, here's another way to think about it. Like back in the olden times, it wasn't viewed as wrong as it is now. So to them, it was okay to do this stuff and to say this, and people didn't see it as wrong. But where times have changed, people have grown and adapt and realize what's right from wrong and to not discriminate against people. But back then, it wasn't exactly like that.
You know, one of my favorite images going around right now is the guy with the 6 foot long pole attached to his hips, keeping everybody away from COVID. It makes me imagine everybody's on a tightrope, trying not to affect the person in front of them, behind them, or inside and beside them. You know, I think we're all too worried about the next person. Going back, you know, you can see our entire, or you're an individual. And right now, I think we're really getting stuck at the fact that one and
Right. Maybe, like Jacob said, maybe that this type of thinking, maybe we can extend it out into infinity almost, right? As far as thinking about that. Yeah, very cool conversation today, guys. Lovecraft is a challenging as hell writer to teach. Right? Of all the writers I teach, he's by far the hardest person I teach. Just because most of the time students love the Poe, right? That Hawthorne's usually goes over well. When we get to Lovecraft, most of the time students are like, "What the heck is this?" Right? So you guys were all good sports. Right? I think you guys got them. So.
You know, that's pretty challenging too. Is I think wouldn't you consider most people that teach literature to be more left leaning on the political spectrum? I bet it's pretty challenging to eliminate one of the most influential, Gothic authors of all time, like somebody that's still influencing movies today. But it's hard to eliminate something like that from your class, just because of their what year was it, 1923 or something? Just because of the idiocy back then.
Yeah, like I'll just be frank. Like I mean, I'm an independent, but I'm more left leaning, right? I'm a lot like a lot of other English people, professors probably, but a lot of English professors would probably call me a fascist or a Nazi, right, for even teaching this stuff, right? So I would be seen as extremely right wing by a lot of people just for even delivering this content. So leave that as it may. I think those kinds of people are fools, though. So so I don't really care what they think. Yeah, so that was actually a tension that I faced a lot when I was in grad school. I'm pretty open-minded, but I guess a lot of people would say, "Oh, he's from Southern West Virginia, right? He must be backwards." Right? So I dealt with a lot of that kind of thing when I was in grad school. It's partly why I'm glad to be teaching here at Southern West Virginia Community College, right? So I don't deal with that kind of crap anymore.
I think it's part of being a little thick-skinned too. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. Just for example, like I'm sure everybody in here has watched at least one episode of The Office, and if you haven't, then you're crazy. But there's a lot of stuff in The Office that there's no way they get away with it now. With the way, and I'm not one of those people who's like, oh, everybody's sissies, the left's so offended, blah blah blah. But I know for a fact that you can have comedy without hurting other people. There's a comic, can't remember his name, but he's been around since like Chappelle and all those guys way back in the day. And somebody on a podcast the other day asked him, how do you get away with still making racist jokes like that? And he's like, well, my jokes aren't racist because most of the time when I tell a joke, I'm telling it from the perspective of the ethnic group that I'm, quote, making fun of. I'm telling it from their perspective. I go out and I study people, I learn people, I learn what they think in certain situations. I don't say anything hateful or hurtful. I say things that are true to them, and they're kind of like, oh, how did this guy know? Like, he must have got somebody on in the inside of our ethnic group that's telling him how we act and react to things. And it's kind of like he's not tiptoeing, he's just being smart about it. And he's not getting canceled over it because it's not hate fueled. And in Lovecraft's time, I don't know if he thought he was being hate fueled or if he thought he was being funny, but it's a big difference in what he's doing versus what's on The Office. The jokes that they make on there. Like, they're lighthearted jokes, but this man was like clear about it.
Yeah, I just rewatched the movie, the great comedy Major League from 1989 the other day. My brother and I were having this conversation. They sure couldn't make this movie today with some of the jokes.
Yeah. Well, it's because I think that the realism in the jokes has started to prevail a little bit. Like, I think with today's society, we can now see that there are people who really do think that way. When they're in movies and in shows and comedians say them, we all think they are lighthearted jokes. There really are people that think that way. And there's some people that can't get it through their head that those people are idiots and they should be completely disregarded and still be able to laugh at the jokes that are in the movie. You know what I mean? Like, I've always chuckled at stereotypical jokes in 80s and 90s movies. Family Guy, American Dad cracks me up whenever they have a stereotypical joke on there. But a lot of those jokes come from writers who are ethnic. A lot of the jokes that are cracked in movies like Major League are written by black people or Indians or Chinese people. That those jokes are because they know they're in there. They know what'll make people laugh because they know the stereotypes. And I think that you have to separate yourself from the fact there are people out there that have that realistic mindset of thinking that every Asian's a bad driver. Like, it's a funny joke in a movie, but if you really looked at somebody and said they're a bad driver because they're Asian, that's racist. Like, if you automatically assume that. But that's where you got to separate stereotypes being funny versus real life situations.
Yeah, you definitely can't take them to heart.
No, good.
I think White Girls is one of the funniest movies ever.
Right.
Making fun of, and as a white girl, I find everything they say hilarious. So.
Right. And then you have people that would say we find it funny because we've not been oppressed. And while I do see that side of things, we didn't have to deal with any. Yeah, we didn't have to deal with that harm or trauma of being a white person. But there's still a lot hardness in the fact that it's two black men dressed up as white girls, like
Right.
literally making fun of every white girl. And
Yeah, I agree. I understand their point of view. We weren't oppressed like they were, and I get that. I think that what makes us so, what they put fun at and stuff is how people are different, and I think that's what makes us awesome is how we're different. Everybody's different. They all have their own characteristics, and it's awesome that we're like that.
Yeah, and that's where I was getting at with the line being drawn between funny ha-ha jokes and hate-fueled jokes. There's definitely a line that doesn't need to be crossed. If we can't learn to laugh at ourselves, then what's the point in being alive? You got to find humor in yourself somehow, and whether that's yourself, your family, your school and town, your state, I love West Virginia jokes. I think it's hilarious when people call us hillbillies. But then you can tell when people are really being mean and saying these people don't have any teeth. Like you can distinguish that line of when it's just, ha ha, they're from West Virginia versus people really being mean to us because we're from West Virginia and they think we're uneducated. So I think there's a big line there.
You can definitely tell the difference on just the deliverance of it. Like I love a good woman joke too. I can laugh at myself when I do something, but you can just tell.
Yeah,
Yeah,
another
and women
great-
have been. So,
one of the films I love to do in my film class is Blazing Saddles. Right, that movie is all about what we're talking about. So if you want a great comedy, check it out. It's one of the all-time greats, Blazing Saddles.
one last thing I'll add to this too is it goes back to you're an adult, you can make your own decisions. If you don't want to consume that kind of comedy or be around that type of person, you don't have to do it.
Mhm.
That's what's cool about America now is we're getting to the point now to where everybody's kind of got equal rights now. Aside from the idiots and the bigots and the racists that we all want to curb stomp. I mean, there's more of us than there are of them. There's more love than there is hate. And if you don't like it, if you're a little bit sensitive to it, don't watch it. But if you think it's hilarious, laugh along with it, but don't take things to heart and be serious about it and let it change your ideology.
That's a good point. The end class today, just want to recommend a couple other titles from Lovecraft if you guys enjoyed it. So some of his other really well-known stories include, looking at my table of contents, At the Mouth of Madness is a good one. At the Mouth of Madness. That's a story about going to Antarctica and finding these old, finding stuff that shouldn't be unearthed in Antarctica. Right? The Shadow over Innsmouth's a good one. The Shadow Out of Time. I also like the Dunwich Horror a lot. The Dunwich Horror is a lot about like what we were talking about with being hereditary things and all that. There's actually a character that discovers one of these things in it too, and actually kind of takes a brave action. Right, so I would recommend that one as well. There's a few other of his stories, the most common, well-known ones, besides the two we did today. So check those out on your own time if you like Lovecraft. This is the kind of thing that you guys will be doing for a paper. Like if you notice, as we talk about this stuff in the class, if you notice something you really dig into it more, right? And that'll help you write your paper later in the class. Great conversation, guys. Next week we're going to dive into, or we're finishing short story section next week. We're going to do some Southern Gothic type of stories, the Southern Gothic, which is always fun to talk about, considering we kind of live in it. Right? So we'll get the Southern Gothic next week. Faulkner is one of our authors, I think. Rose Emily. We'll read. I think we're reading Shirley Jackson through The Lottery. So that'll be a good time. So the reading won't be as intense next week. It'll be a lot shorter next week. Next week will be a pretty easy week. All right. So I'll get that stuff up for you soon. Next week, we'll probably talk paper too. So we'll probably talk our first short paper next week. So we'll finally get into that. Okay. Boo, right? We'll talk shop a little bit next week too. All right, so see you guys next time. Enjoy.